Welcome to this review of a game full of chess tactics featuring Alexei Shirov with the white pieces playing against Ivan Sokolov with black. And this game took place in Wijk aan Zee in the Netherlands in 2004. And so the game begins with e4. And Alexei Shirov decides to play an attacking game, very tactical, with the e4 move and e5 by black. They both control the center, and knight to f3 attacking this e-pawn, which Sokolov defends with knight to c6. And so then we have bishop to b5, the Ruy Lopez opening. And so here, a6 is played, attacking this bishop, and it drives it away to a4. And the game continues with d6, fortifying this e5 pawn. But now we have a position where the knight on c6 has been pinned to the king. And so white castles, getting his king to safety, bringing his rook closer to the center of the board. And then we have another pin here, bishop to g4, pinning the knight to the queen. And so h3 is played, forcing the bishop to decide whether to capture or retreat. But here black plays a different move, preparing to sacrifice his bishop by playing h5, and this sets up a possible fishing pole trap, which would play something like this. Now, although this wasn't played in the game, here's the possibility. If white were to capture, then we would have h takes g4, attacking this defensive knight here. And if white would try to save the knight with, one example is knight to e1, then we would have bishop to h4 threatening, or excuse me, queen to h4 threatening mate here at either h2 or h1. And white could open up an escape path for his king, but then it would be closed again with this g3 pawn move. And then after that, white doesn't really have anything left other than capturing with check. But after a recapture, he still has done nothing about this attack down the h-file. And so another option here would be, if we go back after h takes g4, and if white tried to save the knight by moving to a different spot, h2 for example, it would be the same thing. The queen moves in to h4, threatening mate here, and then after capture with check, recapture here, and then the rook moves away, leaving an escape route. But then white is in a lot of trouble here. And so after check and the king runs, we have check again, and then the king moves to escape, but then the queen captures here and also is threatening another check here with the queen. And in this position, if the king would run back, then we could have a possible mate here with the rook down to h1. But here the white side could make an escape route for the king, and then if check, the king escapes here to d2, but already white would be in a rough position here. Another pawn is captured, and so it's not to white's advantage to go into that fishing pole trap. But if, excuse me, here, let me go back to that position. After h5, if that fishing pole trap did occur, with this capture here. If the capture occurs and then a recapture, and white does go into this fishing pole trap, then if we look at the evaluation here, the computer recommends the best move as d3, which would then give this piece back, this knight, and allow the queen to capture. And that is a possibility. But in order to avoid all that, if we go back to the beginning, and I'll play through the moves really quick from the start. So e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, the Ruy Lopez, and here the bishop's attacked, so it retreats, and the center is fortified with this d6 pawn move, castling, and here the pin, and attacking the bishop, and the fishing pole trap possibility here. But instead, white just captures, and this move breaks up the pawns on the queen side here, so causing a potentially weak a6 pawn, which may give black problems later in the game. So then d4, attacking in the center, and the queen moves here to f6. So if there's a capture here and the queen recaptures, the queen could capture, breaking up the pawns in front of the king here. And also there's a threat of capturing here on d4, and the knight is pinned. So this could cause issues in the center here. And so now we have knight at b to d2, backing up this f3 knight. And so here black decides to retreat his bishop to remove this possibility of a capture here. And then we have a knight remaneuvering over here to help cover the center. And white is not worried if there's a capture. If the bishop captures this knight, he can capture with the a pawn towards the center and open his rook up on this lone isolated pawn here. And so the game continued with queen to g6, and then here we have another pin here on this g2 pawn, and the threat being that the bishop could capture here, and the g pawn would not be able to recapture because of the pin, and then there would be a threat of checkmate possible here. So in order to stop this and slow down this attack, we have the knight jumping up here to g5 to break this pin. And if there's an immediate attack on the knight with f6, the knight would just capture this bishop, so that's not possible. And so we have bishop to d7 to keep this attack on the h3 pawn and not allow the knight to capture. And so a capture in the center, a recapture, and then here we have f4. And so after this, capture, bishop off the back rank, recaptures, and a developing move here, and an attack on this knight. And so the queen comes up to d2 to help protect this knight, and then rook to d1. So here we have a potential attack on the queen after this bishop moves away. And here, a sacrifice by the knight, forking both rooks, and black, to stop this fork, captures with the queen. But now this will leave an attack, leave an opening for white to attack here, as we will see. So here we have a discovered attack on the queen, as the bishop captures over here on c7 and attacks the rook at the same time. And so the queen moves out of the line of attack, and then we have bishop captures and bishop recaptures. And now here, this is an interesting move. The king moves off of this diagonal here to h1, which will prevent any troublesome pins when this knight moves to either c5 or d4, and it would prevent a pin by this bishop down this diagonal. And so now we have finally a developing move to prepare the way for castling for black, which he should have done much earlier in the game. So always remember, king safety is very important, and castling is part of that. If you can castle early in the game and get your king safe, there's less likely of a chance that you will fall into these attacks down the center of the board where your king may be stranded. And so here we have knight to c5, attacking the queen. And so the queen moves out of this attack, retreating. And then this rook, which was not doing anything on a1, moves to the center to help control this d-file. And next we have the bishop moving out of the way because everything was piling up on that bishop. The knight, the rook, the queen. And then here, e5, attacking this knight, which will then have to move, and it will prevent, this rook will prevent the king from trying to castle into some safety and get out of the center, which now it's stranded in the center. And so the knight moves here to d5 to help block this attack up the d-file. But then we have a repositioning of this knight here, which is looking for a potential outpost on d6 here. But the queen captures, preventing the knight from using d6 as an outpost. But then we have this move of the rook on d1 here, lining up on the queen and the king. And this rook on f1 remained here, so it would prevent castling out of this just stranded position in the center here by the white king. Okay, and then we have bishop to e7. So this tries to block this line on the queen and the king. And then we have c4, attacking the knight. And in this position, there's pretty much nothing that black can do, because here we have an attack on the queen. This attack can just be blocked. And here we had resignation by black as the queen moved, the knight moved to block pinning itself on this queen, but we have another pin here with the queen and the king. And so black resigned here. And if we go back a little bit further into this attack and take a look at this move here after rook at a to d1, helping to line up here. In the game, we had bishop to c8, but another possibility instead of bishop to c8 was queen capturing this knight on c5, but black did not do that, as then we would have a rook capture sacrificing itself, which would then allow this, a capture of the bishop, and the king is in check, and the king would start running, but then queen to c8, check, and from here the king's only move would be to get off of this back rank here, but then he would lose his rook. So that is one of the possibilities here. If black would have played something different earlier. And if we go back, so instead of that queen capturing the knight, we had bishop to c8 retreating, and then e5 attacking the knight, and the knight moved to block this open d file, and then after knight to e4 repositioning to attempt to jump in here and check the king, the queen prevented the knight from jumping up there, and then we had this rook to e1 move threatening to pin the queen to the king. So here, if black, instead of playing bishop to e7 to block, would have played bishop to c7, then it would have just been a direct pin on the king. So in this game, we saw many pins, and the main problem for black was leaving his king in the center, not castling early enough. So once again, king safety comes into play, especially when there's a very highly tactical situation in the game. If the king is not safe, it can cause extreme problems. So black's issues here were not castling early enough, and he left himself open to multiple pins, especially this pin on the queen, against the king. So I hope you've enjoyed that game, which highlighted the tactical possibilities and things to be aware of, especially when you don't castle early enough and you leave your king stranded in the center. This was a game of Alexei Shirov versus Ivan Sokolov from 2004. And if you enjoyed this game, please like and subscribe, and feel free to leave comments. Thank you, and have a great day.